Thank you for inviting me, Aiah. Aiah came to visit my garden in February, and so this is how this friendship and relationship and our passion for perennial vegetables and perennial brassicas. So I've got a piece of land which is in the southwest of England, and it's basically, I've been working on that land for 10 years, and it's gone from sheep pasture, a very sort of monoculture of grass and not diverse space, to like a perennial polyculture space. So I just wanted to show you some pictures of what could be done with a barren, like a basically barren piece of land, and turn it into a diverse space of perennial vegetables. So it's not exclusively perennial vegetables, but it's perennial vegetables, annual vegetables, self-sowing vegetables, and native wild plants that move in and find their place. And over time, it just finds its own natural rhythm, and becomes a place of fewer pests, really, because of the diversity that you have in there. It's not like a monoculture where everything is lined up in a nice banquet table for the pests. So it's been an evolving garden and a process of part designing, but mostly allowing things just to do their own thing. So I'm a kind of gentle curator rather than a hardcore gardener, really. So that's been a big learning curve to go from conventional gardening where you panic when there's a weed, to now like the space is so full of everything that just the natural plants just find their way, and you're getting the things that you need there, but also nature is also getting all the things that it needs. So it started off probably like 80% annuals and 20% perennials, and now it's completely the other way around. So I'm actually running out of space to put the perennials in. So it's just a complete mixture of self-sowing plants, and my interest in brassicas has come from the whole perennial vegetable journey. Started with a perennial broccoli, which I'm going to tell you about at the end of the talk. But that's why they have such a special place, because it was discovering that there was such a thing as a perennial brassica that led me to all the other plants and this whole this whole project. So I think that's why they have such a special place for me. So I'm going to show you the 20 perennial brassicas that I've got in my collection. So I'm just going to come to the first one. I couldn't choose which photographs to show, so I just put too many in. Right, so this is just to give you an example of the beginning and the what you can do with the space over time. And I think with like permaculture gardens and like Aiah's garden, you can have the best of all worlds. It's not just human centric. It's edible. It kind of provides habitat, and it's a beautiful place as well, which is also equally important. So it's not that you have to have one exclusively over the other, and it's not that you have to give up all the things that you used to enjoy growing as a conventional gardener. They all have their place in that system, and it means that you can have food for 12 months of the year by incorporating all the perennials and the annuals together. So Incredible Vegetables came out of the experiments, and because this is all about perennial brassicas, I'm going to show you some of my collection, and then I'm going to tell you about the perennial broccoli that started me all on the whole journey. So I was going to start with probably the two most well-known ones, and then we can delve into the mysterious world of perennial kales that aren't so well known. Aiah's got many examples of Daubenton kale growing outside. So this is but this is a variegated one, which I think you've got one of the little ones. So there's kind of two sister plants. That a variegated Daubenton, which is called a panache, and also the more common green form, which are a part of the branching family, which you probably know, the Ramosa family, and it's like Soren was saying, they can, from one plant, they're also kind of sometimes known as walking kales, or because from the central original plant they can layer themselves, root, and then I think this one's about 3 meters wide, probably the same as what yours was doing. And I think from that observation that a stem can also become a root, I think that's probably how people first discovered that this is what it does naturally, so I'm going to take that and learn how to propagate that. So I think that's where the whole vegetative propagation began. And I've read that because these have been propagated like that way for so many years, then that's kind of tended to mean that the flowering side of them has become less and less. Although my Daubentons do flower now and again, but many people report that there's never flower, but mine do occasionally send up flowers. So as part of a polyculture, there's no point in growing one plant, so I use the spaces in between the perennial kales to grow other plants. So I've got feverfew, Japanese wineberries, various alliums that will in the winter, or when sometimes they've dropped their leaves, you get spaces in between all the branches. So I use that for another edible plant. So this is 3-cornered leeks, which will just happily pop up between the gaps and then die back again. So it's a way of just using all the space, but I think they enjoy each other's company because you're making a nice ground cover underneath there. And I think my oldest surviving Daubenton is 9 years old, and many times it's looked like it's on its last breath, but it keeps going strong. And part of the experimentation, which I was talking to Aiah about, is looking at how long lived they are. But I live in a really mild area, so it's really difficult to judge how cold tolerant some of these plants. I mean, but we were talking about we need to send some to the colder parts of the world to test their cold hardiness, because I can't do that where I am, because it very rarely even snows or gets below -3 or 4 in winters. So it's very hard for me to test. So this is the sister plant, which is the more well-known one, and probably the one more commonly commonly found. The panache type seems to be really sought after, but not so commonly available. Although in France, I think you can find it. It's one of Stephen's photographs. So you can see them side by side, but the variegated one seems to be a little bit weaker than not so vigorous as the other one. And there are many fabulous examples of this kale out in Aiah's nursery. And yesterday we were looking at Aiah's got them in containers, and they're absolutely flourishing in their containers, but grown in an open space. I think they must be the queen of the kales, because they can grow 4 meters wide. Part of the experimentation is to just see how something, given no restrictions, can evolve. And this is a particularly important perennial kale, because it was only really rediscovered about 10 years ago. There's a place in Devon called Knightshays, which is a historic place, and the gardeners there were given a cutting from a local perennial kale which was discovered on an allotment, and it's called Taunton Deane because that's the area the West Country. So it was given that name by the gardeners, really, because they didn't know what else to call it. And so it was basically one that had survived from many hundreds of years, and it was also known as a cottager's kale, because it was just one that ordinary people would have used as maybe from themselves, maybe for their livestock. It would have been passed from neighbour to neighbour with cuttings, and that's how these things were kept alive, because it relied on people conserving it and sharing it. But it also means that because it was done by ordinary people, there's very little in the literature about it. So this had a massive revival thanks to the people at Knights Hayes. It also appeared on television, and Stephen Barstow was like celebrating it. This is one that's reproduced mainly vegetatively, and you can get flower heads on it, but the offspring would be very, very variable from it. But I've got a little quote from Charles Darwin who mentions it actually in 1860, which is quite remarkable. And he says, as tradition dictates, to preserve its great characteristics, we cultivate it vegetatively by breaking away side shoots, stripping off the leaves bar the top shoot, and burying it in the ground by between 1/2 and 2/3. So traditionally, rather than pot them up in pots of compost that we do, they just go chop, stick it in the ground, and away you go. And that, there wouldn't be any kind of other kind of propagation. So it would just be stick in the ground, leave it to root, and that would be the traditional way. This is Charles Darwin's writings in 1860. It's in the Gardener's Chronicle, which you can find online. So it was kind of known about then. So I think this perennial kale, it's had a reprieve because so many people are sharing the cuttings now, and especially in the UK, everyone's gone crazy over this one. And it's like Tauntondine, where can I get a Tauntondine? I sell a small amount, and it's the number one plant that I get asked about, and I can't propagate them fast enough for people. So this one has some kind of security now in the fact that it's been spread far and wide. Many of the perennial kales, UK ones, some have just disappeared into the history books, and partly that's just through neglect or not seeing them in being as important to keep, but also the Victorians were so avid at making money that they select a lot of perennial kales were selected to become biennials, so they could sell the seed to everybody every year. So we have to blame the Victorians for for some of that. Bad. So it's like you can't make, how are you going to sell this? It's capitalism in action, isn't it? It's like you can't. How are you going to sell them kale every year if they've got it in their garden forever? So
planned obsolescence.
Yeah. So this one is like a fantastic, resilient. I found it to be fairly resistant to pests. It does get some caterpillar damage, but it always bounces back far more than a sort of conventional brassica. And like I was saying, for a permaculture plant, I use mine for cuttings and as a hedge, an edible hedge. But it also provides habitat for small birds, and also you're keeping them in situ, aren't you? So you're not there's no cultivation, and like Soren was saying, just a very small amount of compost or seaweed. Although some of mine I've never done anything to from the beginning, and they don't seem to have suffered any. And this is a close relative of tree collards, which is the kind of same family, the Acephala family, like without a head. You can see how big they get. So you all know how to make cuttings. So, but Aiah's been showing me her super method, because I've been doing it in a completely different way. And Aiah's been showing me her little incubated bags with the cuttings on. And so I'm going to try Aiah's method when I get home. It seems to be a much faster way. And the purple tree collards, which are very elusive brassica really to get your hands on in the UK, and they are more commonly found in the USA than in the UK and Europe. And it took me about 5 years of pleading on Facebook to get a small purple tree, and I got like a dead stem in the post from a woman in Wales. And but you know, this was like such holy material. They're going, you will live, and I just it was a tiny wilted piece of stem, and I kind of nurtured it like a small baby. And I was so determined that I wanted purple tree collards. This has to live. And so I managed to get it to root, and then I let it mature a little bit, and then I propagated about 200 purple tree collards so that I never ever lose them. So there's lots of discussion about the origins of purple tree collards, and I've read various. You can read various descriptions, but some are that they travelled from Africa with African populations to the States. Some are that they maybe originated from Portuguese kales, and others that they came actually from the UK, from Jersey, the Channel Islands, and then over to America, where they seem to be really hard to come back the other way. I think that mainly it's thought that they're of African descent, but like many of these things, we don't know completely. But again, this is a really one of the really sought after perennial brassicas, and they can in the right conditions they can reach 2 to 3 meters tall, and they need staking. So they're more of I would see them as more as a small scale, growing on small scale, like domestic or small scale farms, just because in an open field situation they would be very prone to damage. But in talking about the nutritional side, then the anthocyanins, you know, like you're talking about superfood, that purple pigments kind of like high up there on the antioxidants and things.
How do they react if they are tumbled over by the wind? Do they grow a lot of stems?
Yeah, they tend to. Some that have tumbled over, it's curious, but they'll grow sideways and then they'll grow up again. So I have experimented with not staking a group of them, so they end up being like that. So you end up with low-growing purple tree collards. So so you could actually grow them like, you know, you still get a harvest, but they basically found their own way of surviving by leaving them like that. So
but will they make roots at the end of the?
I haven't seen any of them rooting, but they just basically gone along and then up again. So it is, and the site where I grow on is very, very windy, so it's quite challenging for the taller brassicas, but they still survive. And so I think, and I found them to be the most rapid rooting out of all of the brassicas that I grow there. They're so rapid. It's quite unbelievable, really. And I use them as part of a polyculture as well, because so I have like various perennial herbs growing amongst them, and whatever decides to self-sow in between. So you're using the space for multiple edible or ornamental plants as well. And there is a project you might have come across online called Project Tree Collard, and which is basically a one-woman operation to re-tree collard America. And she's like doing fantastic work over there. Basically for some of the reasons we talked about like allowing families to have some kind of food security, even if it's just the leafy greens. That this is a big part of your survival, or a big part of your diet. So in poorer areas, she's trying to like introduce the tree collards to make it available to people. So she's doing like amazing work over there. And I'll show you another specimen which has come from that project, which is a completely different type of collard. So this is one of the rarer ones, and I've given Aiah some cuttings of this one because it's a really important one to share. But a plant breeder in Wales, actually, who's a magnificent brassica plant breeder, and about 9 or 10 years ago, he had a flowering event amongst his perennial brassicas. So he had Daubenton's and a purple tree collard flowering at the same time. And so he did some manual crossing of those, and he grew out all the seedlings. And this one, which he called Keeper, for obvious reasons, was the one that out of all that batch of seedlings that became an amazing kind of stable, really truly perennial plant. So it has the benefits of being quite a nice sort of shrub. And talking about windy sites, you need ones that are going to survive that. So it has like the bushiness of a Daubenton, but the really tender leaves of a collard, and it's kind of trying to go up, but it tends to go out. And you get like this Keeper has had no pests on it at all. He just does. The caterpillars don't touch it, the aphids or the whitefly, they don't go anywhere near it. And it's just grown into a probably 2 metre by 2 metre kind of shrub. And I was like really, really fortunate to get a cutting of that. And the work that Graham has done is also gone to the States, where they're breeding all kinds of perennial brassicas. The experimental farm network over there are doing, and this is one of the ones that's gone into their mix of brassicas over there as well. So it's a really important one. And that's the thing that I can't get my head around, is that you have these resilient pest-free crops. Meanwhile, the other conventional brassicas are being sprayed and protected, and it's just like, why? Because these have that kind of, maybe it's they're primitive. They still have the material from their really early ancestors that gives them that resilience. I don't know, but there it is, right in front of your face. You know, there's no need to like spray this or cultivate it annually, or and then you've got this. I haven't seen how long lived this one will be, but I'm presuming it will be fairly long lived, with it, considering its parents. So I think this potential. Some of the work I'm doing in the UK is for. To work with market gardeners to see if we can switch some of their crops to perennial crops. So quite a few small scale market gardeners have approached me and saying, what can we start to perennialise? So of course there's all the onions, all the kales, all the some of the leafy greens. Like, which things could you switch over to, just even if 20% of your market garden started to go perennial, what difference would that make to the soil or to production methods and things? So I'm trying on a really small way to try and infiltrate the market garden world, at least to try and change some of the practices. And I've also been telling, in the UK there's a huge organic farming company called Riverford Farms, which is a very ethical organic company. And they produce things in a really good way. But I'm doing a small project with them, with the Taunton Dean actually, to see if it could become a viable market garden, a substitute, because they're still having to produce all their kale annually. And wouldn't it be a fantastic idea if this became kind of part of the vegetable boxes and then acres and acres of their land could just be left untouched just with these growing for, for harvest. So we're into the first year of the experiment with that to see how viable, and I'm sure it is viable to see. These are just the young seedlings of the keeper. And Aiah's got many examples of yours are very much taller. This was taken in the winter, the Asturian tree cabbage. And it's quite difficult to find a huge amount about it. This is one of the ones where I think we have to travel to Spain and learn really good Spanish and then do your research in the country. Because it's really difficult, apart from knowing that it's from the coastal region of Spain and it's used in traditional soups and stews. Although it's described as quite a short-lived perennial, I've found that you can just keep it going by cutting it back, and it will keep producing leaves. So it's a nice one to have, isn't it? And really nice flavour for people who find dark green kale too strong.
Do you know what it's called in Spain, or where they grow? What they call it?
I don't know what the local name is for it.
I have a seed saver friend in Astoria.
Okay.
Can you ask them?
Yes, but I mean, this is probably the kind of work we need to do.
Yeah, exactly. Because I've just hit a believe me, I've trawled to find information, and the only information I can find is from people saying I'm growing Asturian tree cabbage, and I've tried to make the caldo giliga, this traditional stew from it, and it's like anything else that out there that I can find.
Call it something else.
Yeah, it's probably got a local name.
Region, it's usually a foreign
name,
right?
So I'd like to know more about its origins, and there are probably variations of it as well, like the Portuguese. There must be very local variations of it. But it does quite well. It does quite well on Dartmoor, considering it's a Spanish coastal plant. It's amazing what you can make plants do.
But Astoria is quite cold.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
And it's actually a Celtic culture.
Yeah, so it's probably very close growing conditions to.
The people there, they have very much cultural connection to Britannia and Ireland, Scotland.
Right.
Yeah. They play bagpipes and.
Do
they?
Even own the farms. And
really? Yeah, I didn't know that.
It's very different from what we expect from Spain.
Yeah.
It's not a mature culture. And they don't drink wine, they drink cider.
Do they?
Yeah. It's a cider culture.
Right.
Yeah.
So like almost like the West Country of England. Not that we all drink ourselves stupid with cider, but we give it a go. And this one is again, there's like so many different points of view about the wild cabbages, and which ones are wild, which ones are domesticated cabbages that have gone back to the wild. And there's a project near where I live called the East Devon Forest Garden, which is an amazing guy who's done a very similar thing, like taken a piece of land that horses were on, and it was there no trees, just grass, and he's had his land the same length of time as our land. But if you're ever in the UK and you get a chance to visit his project, it's an amazing project. And basically, he's gone from grass to the most diverse forest garden space, and with the help of volunteers. But he was like a man on a mission, and an amazing permaculture designer. So he landscaped the land. He did the whole design from scratch and made microclimates, like scalps cutting down into the ground to make big bowls in the ground, which are then planted with trees around the top. And so he's been able to create these like warm climate dips into the soil. So he's got lemons and growing, and he's trying to grow avocados and things like that. And it's an amazing place. But anyway, I went to visit him, and he'd collected seeds from one of the beaches on the south coast in England of this wild cabbage, and so it's an unknown one. But it was just like this prehistoric plant growing in his forest garden. And so he shared some of it with me, and so these have been growing for about 5 years now, and they do flower every year. But again, it's one of the ones that you can use the flowers as a little broccoli floret if you want to, and with a little bit of pruning, it's reliably leafed up every year. But it's a curious type, and I can't tell you any more about its history or anything really, other than it's a very distinct specimen in all my specimens. Yeah.
What was the name of his garden again?
It's called the East Devon Forest Garden. You can find them on Facebook. I don't think they have a website, but they have open days, and you can go and volunteer there and stay there as well. They quite often have weeks or weekends where you can go and help out with something, and it's like a perfect example of how you can take something really tired and like undiverse and create this like totally magical series of outdoor rooms full of edible plants. It's amazing, and in such a short space of time. Like the trees go from small, just like hardly doing anything, and then you shut your eyes and go to sleep, and the next day, like the trees, they kind of reach this critical point where they go from like nothing to go, right, we're definitely going for it now. So we've got a forest garden on our field, and the same thing has happened. It's like it happens while you're not looking, and then all of a sudden they really know that they want to be there. And all of a sudden, you just have a kind of established forest. Not overnight, but in a very, very, very relatively short space of time. You can go from nothing to like something that's always been there, like it's always been there. It's amazing, isn't it? The power of that. So this is a rare. It's called. I investigated. I got the seeds from a grower in Norway called Andrew Macmillan, who's a massive brassica fan, and I did some research about where the provenance was from, and he'd originally got the seeds from a woman in Portugal. So this is I haven't come across this name before, the Cuvée Iaga, but apparently that's a local name for it. It's a particularly tall bush cabbage, because there are lots of different types. But this one is 7 foot tall. So this, when I took this photograph just before I came, so this is like above my head, and it's quite an unusual. When I've posted pictures online of it, people have said it's actually quite an unusual coloration, and quite unusual for it to flower as well, because a lot of the Portuguese types have been traditionally propagated vegetatively, and it's got white flowers as well, so it's quite an unusual one. And from what I've discovered about the Portuguese perennial brassicas, they're quite a distinct group, and there've been many different land races, basically down to small scale farming and small scale horticulture, because and they've sort of been local to region to region. But what's happening with the loss of diversity, like in many other areas, is that this isn't a high-yielding, vegetable. It's not going to sit on a supermarket shelf looking pretty for too long. So it's like, and that's the main criteria, for selling the food to the public. And then people fall out of favour of things that might look a bit purple, or you just get used to a uniform. So all of these beautiful land races. Some have been lost. I know there's some people that are kind of taking care of the collections, but the difficulty we face is that things that can't be saved in a seed bank have to be kept alive as living examples. So you need a international kale reserve, which is what I'm doing in my garden, is like a mini kale reserve, and I'm really trying hard to keep all those ones. It's my duty to kind of keep them all alive for the future. So I'm doing it in a small way, but that could be done in a much bigger way. And each country should really do an inventory of what they've got, and then that could all be shared internationally, which is what we've been talking about. And it's not just because these are historical varieties. We need to keep them just because of their cultural and historical significance, but also for future plant breeding. You know, and when that sort of plague of insects has munched through all the cauliflowers or something, this might have the gene that will make those more resilient, sort of thing. So it's absolute stupidity to let even one single old brassica to go by the wayside. It's madness. So I'm trying to do my small part to look after them and collect more of them.
Can I ask a question about this one?
Yeah.
Is it different from, I know of one that's called Gallica with the G
Yeah.
in the front. Is this the same? Just a different spelling?
What I've read is that Gallica is kind of like refers to the type, which is central stem, and I might be wrong, but like central stem, loose leaves with like long petioles, and but I've heard some of the Spanish kales referred to as Gallica types as well.
Okay.
But then there's loads and loads of cuvée, the cuvée with a subtitle, which refer to the way it's propagated or the way it looks, or and there are a lot of different local names for them. So there's a myriad of Portuguese types. But from what I've read, the Gallica part just means like the open-headed. I might be wrong, but this is an unusual bush cabbage out of the ones. And this is the stuff of legends. I was giving a talk in Cornwall, which is the very furthest part of the southwest of England, and it was in a tiny village hall. It was like the depths of winter, the pitch black. I got lost in the country lanes, going, I'm never going to find this place. And it was about 25 people in the middle of February or something, and I was doing my thing about perennial kales, like perennial kales, and then this old farmer guy jumped up and like ran out of the room and disappeared. And I thought, oh, well, he doesn't really like my talk very much. He's had enough. And he was going, wait there. And I'm like, what's happening? And then about 15 minutes later, he came back into the room, clutching this gnarly old lump of perennial kale, it just ripped out the ground. And he's going, this is the ancient Cornish kale. And from that region, Egloskerry is a tiny village in Cornwall, but there is kind of local talk of this kind of ancient Cornish kale. And when I investigated more, it's one of those ones that is still in living memory, and there are small amounts of it, but it's not documented anywhere. So it's very much specific to that region. And when I've asked other plant breeders or kale specialists, they have come across it, but it's almost like a Daubenton that's gone into a dwarf form. So it's a very low growing, much more low growing than a Daubenton, and it has a slight twist on the stems, like a corkscrew twist. And we were speculating about whether that's just because Cornwall is surrounded by coast, and it's had to become more of a stunted, low growing plant. But this was exciting because it was one that I discovered, and it gives you hope that there's like others out there that might be just in people's gardens that you could still discover. So
Yeah.
And this is another one which is become a bit of a mystery, which although the everlasting kale, the Aiah Noach, is associated with like Germany and Holland and Belgium, it's just become a kind of generic name for all kinds of perennial kale, so it's really hard to know whether there was an original one or they speak of ones in the UK that were called, you know, given this name, and Aiah's got some called Aiah Noach from Germany, but this came from a cutting from Schumacher College, which is in Devon, which is close to where I live, and that it was a great big 2-metre tall shrub. But then from what I've read, the Aiah Noach is supposed to be similar to a Dorbenton, but the plant I got it from was nothing like a Dorbenton at all, so it's very different. And this is a similar way to Portugal. They're in northern Spain, they have their own land races of kales. But this one was given to me, and the family it came from was said this was like a very, very typical type, and so it's kind of like a true Galician kale. And although a lot of them at first glance look like Taunton beans, they actually have very distinct leaf shape and slightly different growing habits. And this is another purple tree collard which was grown from seed. So this one actually flowers. It's a bit hard to see. It flowers every year, and Aiah and I were discussing about why would they grow into that curious shape, and we were talking about maybe like they've evolved against predators, you know, lower predators and things like that.
In the wild in the Mediterranean, they grow on cliffs.
Yeah.
So for that reason, they're out of the reach of
the rabbits and things.
And goats and.
Yeah. So it's an evolutionary trait to do that.
I think it gives good meaning if you're growing on a steep cliff, that you have this kind of getting out in the light.
Yeah, that's true. So you're putting all your leaves out.
Yeah, because it's usually, I think, on the northern side.
It's on the northern side,
so
yes.
if they can get out with a small light,
they
grow better.
But that also tells that it's nature that has evolved this shape. It's not in gardens.
Yeah.
It's nature. It's really old, hardy plants.
Yeah. So I just have a few more to show you, if you can face any more. Tell me if you're over-kaled. So this is another one which I couldn't find much, but this is from the Helgoland Island off the coast of Germany, and it's probably not too far from the coast of Denmark either. And
it has been sometimes Danish, sometimes German.
Oh, has it?
Yeah.
So this is a cold tolerant kale, and it has more of a sort of succulent type leaf, a bit more like a sea beet, and again it's called a wild kale, but who knows whether it's wild or domesticated gone wild, or a variation of things. But the leaves have quite a sort of waxy coating which protects them from the harsh weather and the salt sprays and things. And I just found like legends of Vikings eating it and things like that. I don't know whether that's true or not. But it's one that's been spread by humans, you know, like replanting it around populations and things like that. It's kind of moved around. But I think it's one that's considered potential for like a much colder climate growing kale. So I always like to fantasize about lost perennial kales. So part of the thing on being on social media and posting what you do is that you get people approaching you with their plant material, which is a good thing. And this woman approached me to say that an Italian family had lived in this house for 40 years, and they'd bought plants from Italy with them, and they were moving out, and the new person wanted to just clear the whole garden. There was loads of Mediterranean plants in the garden, and they went, we're getting rid of all of those. So she contacted me saying, you must have cuttings of this in case it's something special. And I go, yes, please. So she sent me some cuttings, and this is it growing in situ in the garden. So it's obviously quite an old specimen. So I don't know whether it's from an original Mediterranean line or whether it's a Taunton Dean gone weird. I don't know. But because of the story and everything, it's kind of really nice to speculate about it being an old Italian one. So I've rooted the cuttings, and so I've got them. I've got them growing in the garden. They're only this big so far. So I have to wait and see what it actually does and whether it is a different type. But it's still worth the rescue anyway. So I'll have to let you know about that one. And this one is another special one in the collection, which Ken Fern, who wrote the book Plants for a Future and also set up the massive database and had his project in Cornwall for best part of 20 years, experimenting with all kinds of perennial vegetables. And the Dr. Wellwood, who was the woman who wrote the final report on the whole project, she lives up the road from me, and she contacted me and went, I've got Ken Fern's original Perennial Kale. And I'm going, really? You've got it? And she goes, yeah, she took from the project, and she'd just been keeping them all in little pots in her garden. And so I know that is its true provenance, because she was the surveyor on the site and everything. And so she handed it to me, and so it's kind of like a special one, and it's like a multi-headed, 1,000-headed type that it flowers every year, and it's kind of a weird cabbagey, a kale cabbagey mix kind of thing. It's and I haven't come across anything else like it. I'm not sure where it comes from, but it's obviously one that Ken Fern originally thought was a good one for his forest garden. And, so the Project Tree Collard woman who in America, who studied at Merritt College, which is in Oakland, California, they let their perennial kales and other brassicas just all open pollinate, and this is the offspring of one of those mixes which she took and then further cultivated. So it's quite an unusual collard, and the leaves can grow to like sort of 60 centimeters long each leaf, and it's one that reliably is perennial if you sort of prune it every year. And again, this came from the guy at the East Devon Forest Garden who seems to get all kinds of interesting things in his garden, so I go over and just steal them off. So it's a tricky one to root because it just has those big fat stems and not many side shoots, so you have to wait for a little side shoot to appear. And I apologise for giving names to brassicas, but this was a rescue story where I live in a rural area, and I have to drive across the moorland a couple of times a week. And then for the last 3 years, in this really, really open area where there's just sheep and no houses, there were these 2 brassica plants growing by the side of the road, all by themselves, nothing around. And because I drove past them for 3 years, I knew they were perennial brassicas, just hanging on there. And then one day I drove past, one of them was completely gone, and the other one was lying dead in the road, like run over, like a road accident, like lying on the tarmac. So I just went, put the brakes on and went, I'm rescuing you, you're coming home with me, like nobody else is going to rescue you. So I took it and then did the same thing as I did with the purple tree collard to rescue it. And I thought, well, how has it got there? What is it? And it's been surviving there by the side of the road, so it deserves to have a place in the perennial brassica garden. So it's so that's its temporary name until somebody can tell me otherwise.
Very honest name.
Yes.
I love that name.
End the story.
So it lives another day, and now I want Soren and Aiah to tell you this story, funny story.
Oh. So funny.
You can tell where you got it.
Where I got it from, it came from a grower who got the seeds from the Heritage Seed Library in the UK, which distributes rare seeds amongst you have to be a member, and then you get certain seeds, and it was distributed as this kind of traditional native Danish kale, perennial kale, and then all over the internet this is named as the traditional Danish kale, and it's gone to America, it's gone like all over Europe as this, and then I found out in the last couple of days that it probably came from the south coast of the UK, and the Danish woman had written "eat the leaves" on the packet, and it got that name for "eat the leaves" instead of "it's true." So it probably came.
In the UK, when you talk
I would say bisbladine, but I don't know that. That's not how you pronounce it. But that's not the right pronunciation, I know. So it's probably one that's growing, 20 miles up the road from me. And I was like, I found the Danish native perennial kale. And then the weird thing is it's gone to America, and people are going, we've got this really exciting Danish perennial kale in our collection. Which is hilarious, isn't it?
Yeah,
I know.
Stephen Barstow asked me more than 10 years ago if I know who this lady, Aiah Noach, is, who had donated the seeds of this old Danish cultivars to the Heritage Seeds Library. And I said, oh, Aiah Noach, it can only be animated Olsen. So I called her. And she said, oh, it's so many years ago. We just was kind of starting seed saving and would take all kind of seeds and put them everywhere and share them. So I took some seeds in my garden, and I don't know exactly what it was. It could be the one from the cliffs of Flerårig in England, or it could be, and I forgot what other one it could be, or it could just be a mix. Or she had, at that time, she was growing all the kale she could find, and had open pollination. So
It could be anything.
It could be anything. And she's actually I called her again later because sometimes when you ask a question about things happening many years ago, you don't remember everything. So I called her, I think it was a year later, and asked her, do you remember anything more? And she said, no, but I feel embarrassed that I sent the seeds to her. And it's very funny that she feels embarrassed, but a lot of people are so happy to grow it. So I wish she would feel kind of proud that she did it.
I know it's
not
becoming
correct, and I think the rest of us can learn that it doesn't always have to be correct.
No.
But I'd like to add something to this story, because I got seed from Stephen perhaps 5 years ago, and I sowed them, and I got 20-40 plants out of a little packet, so they germinate well. And I planted them in the garden out there, and they were uniform. They were not a mix. Those 20 plants I think I planted, they were uniform. They had huge, big, rounded leaves. They were completely tender and nice to use in salads. Not leathery, nothing, really, really tender ones. A bit like Asturian kale.
Yeah.
But not as yellow as that. They were more ordinary green kale color. And they grew so well and uniform. And I was looking so much, and I promised Stephen to save seed of them for him. But then in the winter they were not protected. So the deer ate all, first the leaves, then the top of the heads, and then down. So there was only that much stem left in the spring. and they got tall like this in one summer, and the leaves were one leaf for dinner, for one dinner. That was enough. That was how profound it was. Really, really a lot of food. So I miss it. I can't find it again. Yeah. I really hope
But
to find it again.
From what I hear, I guess it could be one of the Portuguese or Spanish colors.
We're never going to know now, are
But
we?
it was
We
certainly,
won't know.
it was certainly uniform. So,
Yeah.
so what has been around, I think, when I got it from Stephen, it had been around places, and they were still uniform.
Yeah.
So it's not a mix of seeds.
Yeah.
That we can.
And white flowers, as I remember.
The deer ate them, so I never
Yeah,
saw the
okay.
flowers.
Okay.
It's nice that you feed the local deer population.
They were well fed, that would. All sorts of things.
And this is another rescued kale from a friend's allotment. He was a permaculturist, and he had this wild allotment. All the other growers were like really annoyed with him because his was just like wild and spreading. But this is again, it's one that doesn't have any provenance, but is distinct from all the other collection, and it's just a multi-headed shrubby cabbage with sort of woody stems, and sort of 1,000-headed kales are kind of such a generic name for so many plants, and so it's kind of an impossible one. But I'm just keeping them alive for like so we can work with them in some way. And this is another one that has a funny story because Stephen Barstow was writing on his blog about Warsaw is near Birmingham, like a big city in the UK, which has very diverse population of people, and in the allotments there were lots of plants from lots of different countries, and he came across this different type of kale, which was being grown by a Kenyan man. So I think he got very excited that it might be a Kenyan type, and this is one of Stephen's photographs of it. So it's obviously not like a Dorrington kale because of its growth habit. So it is quite a distinct one. But when I checked with Stephen about whether it was a true Kenyan kale, he still never got the answer on that, and so he advised me to go to the allotments and go investigate, which I can do after when the lockdown finishes. I'm going to go up there and see if I can find out more. But it's a very unusual, like a collard type stem, but a much more bushier leaf growth than a collard. And maybe it's a cross between the branching types and the collard types. So that's another one I have to let you know about. And just the last few slides I'm going to show you. Have we got enough time just to show this? So this is the perennial brassica that started me on the whole journey of plants, perennial plants. And the funny thing is, like, we think that we work on the plants, but the plants work on us, really, and we are their slaves. And so perennial 9-star broccoli is like a really old sort of heritage vegetable. That the idea behind it is that you get a central sort of almost cauliflower-like head with lots of smaller heads, and that's why it's called 9-star, because lots of smaller heads around the outside. And in a true 9-star plant, you would get those traits with a big head and many smaller ones. And a true 9-star, you'd be able to eat all the florets in the spring, cut it back, and then the following spring you get the same growth for florets. Maybe not as big, but you still get a decent crop. And my early 9-star plants, I managed to crop them for 5 years, so every spring I got a useful crop of almost cauliflower, So you could use it like a perennial cauliflower. It's a slightly stronger taste than a conventional cauliflower, but still a useful thing to have. And the reason why it's so close to my heart is because, like all the other plants I look after, the reason why so many of them disappear is because they're not commercially viable, and the seed companies that produce commercial seed for sale, or the farmers who grow crops for sale, is that they're going for the high yield and uniform crops. They don't want brassicas that suffer from aphids or have low yield of seeds. They're going for the higher yielding ones. So the old heritage crops like this one, what's happened is like the number of people producing it just got smaller and smaller and smaller until there's probably like 10 companies in the whole world, or even less than that now, that were still producing this for seed. And I just sort of felt like that was a tragedy to like let that disappear. It was developed sort of in the early 20th century, so it's kind of like 100-year-old variety. And what's happened is that the gene pool of seed has just got smaller and smaller and smaller. So the plants that you get now from seed are just kind of, they put out a sprout. You might be lucky in the second year if you get anything usable. So they've gone into this inbreeding depression where they don't resemble anything from the original plants. So you can still find some good examples. So what I decided to do, like a one woman mission, which was a mad project because working with brassicas is not an easy thing, and I'm a novice plant breeder. I'm not an expert, and I have plant breeding colleagues who are in the background going, "Mandy, do it, you know you want to do it," and I go, well, there's only one way to learn, and that's just to do it. And my friends who advised me on the way. So what I did was I set out to collect as much seed of the 9-star in the whole world that I could find, which took about 2 years to approach different companies. Some of the companies were really reluctant to give me their seed, and I'm going, that this is not commercial. This is not a commercial project. This is for humanity. So please give me your seed. And so some smaller growers were, of course, they went, you can have whatever we've got. And some individuals who'd saved seed in their garden, some companies in Europe still grew it. So I ended up with about only 12 accessions of seed. And the University of Warwick in the UK also has a massive seed bank. So they had seed that had been saved from 1982, and they sent me packets of their seed, which was good because that had gone through less generations of breeding. So there was a hope that might have some more of the original material in it. So and then I had to find a big greenhouse to grow it because I only have very small undercover space. So I managed to borrow a huge space to bring all the plants on in a local abbey, which I took over their big greenhouse. And then we set about planting them out with a big planting map, so we could like track all the different types. And the variation was just huge. With the perennial brassicas, I would never normally cover them, but because this seems like such a precious, when I've grown 9-star in the past, I would never net it. They're very resilient to pests, but I was like, I'm only going to get one shot at this first thing, so I gave them extra special treatment. And then they got uncovered and then grown on into this kind of plantation of 9-star, which the diversity was just, they went from like single stalks with one floret to like some almost true to type plants, which was quite promising. And then others that just looked like a white version of a purple sprouting broccoli, with just lots and lots of small heads. But then I had to kind of start from somewhere, and then the idea was to just do a mass cross-pollination of all those different variations, just to start from a wider playing field, with the idea that with some massive amount of money from somewhere that I can carry this on. But I just had to start somewhere. So this is then when they're all going into flower, and the majority flowered simultaneously. I was quite lucky that there was at least some flowers on each plant at the same time. But which is that when you're beginning to do plant breeding, I hadn't even considered the fact that some might still have florets where others had finished flower. I hadn't thought about that. It's like, oh yeah, they really need to flower all at the same time. But it was a beautiful feast for the bees, and it was an incredible thing to have growing as well. And then the last part was to harvest. There's about 250 giant brassicas which I had to stuff into the back of my truck, like 10 at a time, and drive them miles to a friend's barn who had a huge dry barn that we could hang them all to. It was epic. And I've just gone mad. Like, whose idea was this? And I'd be like driving at night with all great big bags of brassicas, like hauling them in. I mean, they're massive plants. I could only get a few in at a time to drive them to the barn, and then we just carried them in, a couple at a time, and then we had, it was a huge barn, so we dried them all just to give them a bit more drying time, and then any seed that dropped we could collect from the floor. And then we spent like 2 days jumping up and down in trucks to split the seed pods open, which I had to bribe all my friends with beer and chocolate and cakes and promises of fine meals in restaurants and things. So I had about 8 people jumping up and down in buckets. It's actually, I've got some video. It's actually quite. It just felt like we'd gone back to an ancient, because it was a group thing and there was the sound and the rhythm of it all. It just made me feel like it was like a really funny feeling of like like we were doing something ancient and important. It was like so special, because it just felt like this is what we're supposed to be doing, and this is what we should be doing as a group, community. Like, why aren't we doing this anymore? And part of the training I've been doing is with this foundation called the Aiah Foundation, which is doing a seed sovereignty training for growers, and they're trying to it's not a completely lost art, but it's becoming a lost art, so they're training up people like myself and other growers to really learn how to do it properly, so this whole seed saving thing was part of that as well. It's me jumping up and down in a trug.
Which year was this?
This was the last, they were planted out in 2018, and the seed harvest was 2019, and then we got about 2.5 kilos of 9-star seed from it. So some of the seed goes back to the University of Warwick, and then the idea is, because I haven't got enough land to keep growing massive blocks of brassicas, I want to just make that an open source seed, but not so much for home growers, but I really like people with some space and some isolation space to go, right, here's the seed, can you please? And then I could just go and visit the sites when it's growing. That's the idea, and I really have to do that soon. I kind of run out of steam a bit with it, because I'm looking after so many plants, but I'm not going to let it go. I'm going to make sure it's all shared out.
Would you do a project, experimental farm network? They have this kind of
I'm in touch with them. Yeah. And the guy Chris Hermanix, who's the big perennial brassica breeder over there, he knows about what I've been doing, so he would be a really good person to send the seed to as well.
What about the plants afterwards? Did they survive, or were they gone after producing so much seed?
They were gone, but that was my choice, because I didn't have the ideal thing would have been to cut the seed heads and then see which ones would come back as perennials. But I didn't have the land to be able to like leave them in situ. So that would be for another stage where you could grow on all the offspring, and then one test would be to go, right, we're going to harvest them every year like food crops, and then just see which ones are the perennial ones. So that would be one line of experimentation to go, which are the truly perennial ones and which are the really weak pretend ones. So, but in that mix somewhere, there is the 9-star, but that's another whole big work to do, and I need help with it because I can't do that as a single person. So.
You laid the foundation.
So that was all the brassicas. I got a few more slides, which is about another plant breeding project if you want to see them, but it's not compulsory. Which is about the ground. Okay, so it's the last one. So I'm doing many different seed saving. I'm working with skirret and lots of other vegetables on a big scale. With the skirret, there's also very diverse populations of various root size and woodiness, and the aim is to produce fat skirrets that are, like a parsnip, but are perennial. And I think even Stephen was dreaming about rainbow skirrets, where you had purple and orange skirrets. So I haven't got any pictures of that. I'm sorry I didn't add those in. But the one crop that I'm working with is it's a North American plant, which you probably know about, and a legume, and it has climbing vines. But the real fantastic part of it is the tuber, which is really much more higher protein than a potato. So it has the potential to be a really good vegetarian, vegan foodstuff as well as a general foodstuff. And it was a really important food for the indigenous peoples of North America, and it grows right along the eastern side of the states, from quite southern populations right to the north. And it was collected as an important foodstuff, but it wasn't only collected; it was actually propagated by the native people. So populations were put in certain places so they could go back and harvest. So the idea of it being wild is not correct. It was also cultivated, and I've been really lucky. A fellow plant researcher, Mr. Owen, Dr. Owen, gave me his entire Apios americana collection to work with, which it would take me my whole lifetime to collect, and I think I have about 32 different accessions. And some which have the potential to make seed pods, so we could actually collect. So instead of vegetative reproduction, we could work with them with the seeds to try and find a more northern, cold adapted, which would grow well in European conditions. So I was saying, what do they taste like? They taste absolutely delicious. Like a crispy fried potato, like the best thing ever. Like, because some things you grow, the unusual vegetables, you go, well, I'll save that for when I'm really starving. But this is delicious, and I fried them with sea salt and oregano. It just tasted like potato chips, but a dense nutty taste. And my partner was going, can we have more of those? I'm going, no, they're for propagation. Let's go, please, can we have more? Go, get your hands off my tubers, they're for next year. So I just have a kind of little hopness farm, and the reason I'm growing them, I'm growing them like this is just because I have to keep track of all of them. So in a different situation, if you were growing them for food, you could grow them in a forest garden situation, or you could grow them in the soil with climbing support. But this is purely to I'm so worried about mixing them up. I would never know which, and they have very, very distinct characteristics, all the different types. Some are really, really small vines, some massive rampant vines, and there's also a difference in the way the tubers grow. They grow on a chain, and some have very long distances between each one, some very short distances. And but Aiah and I were discussing about their potential as a food crop, but like many of the perennial crops, they kind of lend themselves to small scale growing and not mechanistic production. And we were saying, well, how would you mechanise it? Would you even want to I wouldn't want to mechanise it, but we were talking about apparently there's more pigs than people in Denmark. But
I think in Japan and Korea.
are they commercialising it?
Yeah.
How have they managed to grow them in a commercial way, like with the structure?
I think they just make the right machine to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and pick the right soil where
Yeah.
it's easy to harvest.
Right.
Yeah.
But you'd have to have climbing supports,
Yeah.
and then you
They
remove
do a lot
them.
of plant
Yeah.
growing commercially that
Yeah.
we would
It's
never do
different,
here.
different to
Yeah.
here, yeah. But we came up with an idea.
Yeah.
That, like Sten Nørhed, he's into many funny things. And his friend Jørgen Hansen, who's also up there in the middle of Sjælland, he grows Jerusalem artichokes around the corners of his fields. And he says that's just for future use when the villages are poor and they can't get food anywhere.
Yeah.
There are lots of these Jerusalem artichokes here. But we could add those ground nuts in between, and they would have something to crawl on. And there would be both the protein tubers and the starchy tubers that people could eat.
Yeah.
It's just
People do grow them in combination with Jerusalem artichokes because they seem to like to grow in between other things. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
I also noticed growing them, the hopness in tubes that they, after some years, they produce so much nitrogen in the soil that you need other plants to
soak it up.
Yeah.
soak it up
Okay.
and to use it, and the other plants will be very dark green leaved.
Yeah. I know when you harvest the tubers, you can actually, I don't know if you can see it in this photograph, you can maybe see some of the nodules, but they're really distinct nitrogen nodules on them. And
Small lumps.
yeah, and if you've got some that haven't got that, you can inoculate them with some of your stock. Sorry.
I just remember one thing I want to warn about with the groundnut, the hopness, is that you really need to boil it for a long time. It's not enough to boil it until it's soft and tender. You should boil it, if you boil it for 45 minutes, because people can get very bad reaction. Not the first time they eat it, but the second or third time they eat it, if they don't. One article that wrote about the latex, which probably also is to protect from other animals. It's probably a way the plant protects itself from being eaten
Overgrazed,
too much, overgrazed.
Yeah. But I still think it's worth it, even if
it's so delicious.
If you're ill on the fifth time.
Probably.
But I sell these tubers, but I always tell people, I always put a little piece of information in with it saying, you know, with all uncommon foods that you always proceed with caution, and they always try a little piece first, because if it's something you've never eaten before, then I always give people that advice to go, you know, like with daylilies or something, that you don't just eat a massive daylily stir fry the first time. It's like
rolling the dice.
So they're all useful foods, but we have to work with them carefully, don't we? So, but on the pod front, I've been doing this for like 5 years, growing them on, and I get quite good flowering, but the pods are still elusive. I've never got any to the pod stage. So this is like a yearly thing that I'm doing, and really I need, because our site's quite exposed, it's not ideal for the vines.
Have you been hand pollinating?
I have tried, by
Because
having
they need a special
like a
insect.
tripping, like a tripping
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
flowers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you either need to do it by hand or you need the right insects to like trip them, and also you need more than one to flower at the same time. But it's a labour of love. It's like a mission. With my plant breeding friends, who, if you watch this, you know who you are, going, Mandy, do it. And so it's a precious collection, and then you feel like I have to take this forward because I've been given this gift of this diversity of the hopness, which is the traditional, one of the traditional native names is the hopness, and that's another thing that's really important, to carry the traditional name of the plant, so we don't just use European terms, we use the kind of native terms for the plants. So,
What about the Native Americans who are growing them? What were they using to make them climb on?
I think just using the natural environment of whatever shrubs, or they will hold on to.
Maybe, or like,
Yeah, I think there was.
in places where there was some kind of
There's quite a lot of areas which were like cleared into open grasslands, and there's an amazing guy. I think it's Zach Elfers who's written. There's an amazing article he wrote called "The Diggers of Groundnuts," and it's the most beautiful, poetic, historical document about the native peoples and the groundnuts, and like the sort of European view of this untouched wilderness, which wasn't a wilderness at all, and the grassy areas were cleared so that some of the crops could be cultivated by the indigenous peoples, and the Europeans came along and go, wow, look at this great untouched wilderness that had been cultivated for thousands of years by the indigenous peoples. And I feel like if I speak about any crop that I'm borrowing with reverence the crop, I treat it with reverence. So like it's really important to speak about its origins, and that I'm fortunate enough to have that collection, because it's not my food or my culture, so I work with it with reverence and kind of love. And then if you do work with a crop, then like the Oka breeders, it's like maybe some of that research can go back to the origins, of where it came from, sort of thing.